Hi, this is the BirdClef Plus 2025 project. My name's Emily Hernandez, and my partners are Ryan Nguyen and Martin Bowles. So, the goal of this project is to take a data set of animal recordings from the biodiverse Middle Magdalena Valley in Colombia and basically to train and a classifier to identify animals in the data set by their sound. Moreover, it's ideally to help researchers who track the well being of animal populations, like how many of them are, or like how many of them there are, or where they are going, and this will help to quickly analyze the results of their conservation efforts. Like for example, if they get around to the eradication of the mosquito, and all of a sudden they abruptly stop getting reports of a certain animal or species, then we can assume that maybe something really bad happened. At its core, this project aims to support conservationists and ecologists by automating a process that currently takes countless hours of expert review and a lot of money overall. So the dataset we use was provided by the BirdClef Plus 2025 machine learning competition held by the Cornell Lab of Ornithology each year. The dataset consists of 206 species of mostly birds, but also includes mammals, amphibians, and reptiles in there as well. Although, as we used it, the dataset was reduced to 168 species after we removed all the underrepresented classes, which in our case was those species with fewer than 10 samples in them. In the graph, you can see the distribution of samples across the classes. From the far left is one with 800 samples, to the far right is more like 10 to 15 samples. So, as we can see, it is pretty unbalanced. The length and quality will vary between these audio clips. Some clips have background noises of animal callings or maybe even people talking. Also, some clips are minutes long, while others are more like 30 seconds to around that amount of seconds long. So that's something to be accounted for when working within this data set. So for our approach, we use BirdNet to extract the audio features. So BirdNet is actually an open source neural network, which is publicly available. It is able to classify about around 3,000 bird species worldwide. It is not amazing or trained to classify birds specifically to our data set or even non bird animals, but we can use it to extract the audio features, which are what we use to distinguish each type of bird species. So this kind of works like the color of someone's eyes or hairs or stuff like that that are unique to each person or species, as we can say in this case. We could then use those audio features to create a custom classifier, which for us, we use an ensemble classifier, including logistic regression and support vector machine algorithms. We could then provide the classifier with an audio clip, and it'll hopefully correctly identify the animal that the sound came from. To use BirdNet, we had to cut all of the samples down into like 3-second chunks because otherwise BirdNet would not accept it as an input. Once we had the features and the chunks of each sample, we then combined the chunks, average them together so we end up with one set of audio features for each sample, and the idea is to magnify the call of the species and average out the background noises in general. So the results at the end, our classifier achieved around 85% unweighted accuracy, which I guess we could say is pretty good. But as you can tell, not all of our classes are identified with equal accuracy.
This is Ryan Nguyen speaking, and this is the part where I demonstrate the prediction script. Here's the notebook that we're using to do the final prediction. Here you can see we're slicing our audio clips into 3-second chunks. We're passing those chunks into BirdNet to extract the features, and then using those features to predict what animal the sample came from. This is some leftover code. If we provide an audio clip from the data set, we can use the metadata to retrieve the location that sample was recorded from. But in any other case, if we don't provide the metadata or if our audio doesn't match up with the metadata, then it'll just default to 0, 0, which is fine because most of the data in the data set defaults to 0, 0 anyways. So here we are. If I just paste in some different file paths, I can give it an audio clip of a banana keet, correctly predicted as a banana keet. We can do this for a couple other animals, like a bare-faced ibis. Bare-faced ibis, confidence 40%. Saffron finch does really well on this one, 58% confidence. Black vulture, here we are, predicted as a black vulture. Everything checks out here. So that's all fine and dandy, but what went wrong? Because not everything's classified with such stupendous accuracy. Misclassifications might happen when classes don't have enough data, are too similar to another class, or the data that does have isn't very good. So here's some visuals I generated to sort of get a handle on what actually is happening with our bad classes. Here on the left, we can see that the gray seed eater has the poorest classification accuracy of all of our classes, which is odd because it has more samples than some other classes that have better classification. But we can see exactly why that's the case if we look over here at this confusion matrix. This says that 20% of the time, clips of a gray seed eater are being classified as a gray seed eater. 40% of the time, the gray seed eater is being classified instead as a yellow-bellied seed eater. So you can sort of see how that might have happened. One seed eater is going to sound similar to another seed eater, I assume. One of my guesses for what's happening here is that maybe anything that sounds like a seed eater, no matter its variant, is going to be rolled up into the yellow-bellied seed eater class, but yeah, who knows. Here is another way to look at the same problem. Here we've got blue-gray tanagers often being classified as a different kind of tanager, and vice versa. Same story with the great and snowy egrets. So what we did to address this was data augmentation. We undersampled the overrepresented classes. Here you can see that that class that once had 800 samples now is only using 200 of them. And for the underrepresented classes, we use Smote to generate artificial data to bring them up to par. This didn't work at all. You can see our per class accuracy graph for the augmented dataset looks pretty much the same as it did before augmentation, and it actually went down a bit. So what's happening here? Here are some ideas for why it's not performing. Our classifier isn't working as well as it could. Maybe the data is wrong in all sorts of ways. The recording quality, the samples that we've got in the dataset, they're being provided by people uploading recordings from their phones, so microphone quality could be a factor here. Background noise. Some of our clips, the primary subject is pretty quiet, sometimes even undetectable, and in the cases like that, the background noise, other animals' calls, might be overpowering the primary subject, which I would guess has the same sort of effect as mislabeling the data. Maybe it could also be BirdNet that's the problem. It's not meant to be trained on non-bird animals, such as what we've got in our data set, so it might not be giving us high quality features for those specific animals. We also might be losing details during feature averaging. So things we could do to try and improve performance. We could try working with different classifiers. The ensemble classifier wasn't our first choice. I started by building a random forest classifier, and that didn't work out very well at all. Martine also worked on a convolutional neural network in something called MLP, which seems to achieve about 86% accuracy, but it didn't end up getting incorporated into the ensemble. We could also try a custom feature extraction. If BirdNet isn't suitable for this task, then we could maybe create our own neural network that is specifically tuned to extract features from our dataset in particular. We might, maybe, we still don't know, maybe finding a way to use the unaveraged data could improve accuracy as well. That's all I've got, but up next is Martine presenting on what he was working on with the CNNs.
All right, so for my part, we originally had a one-dimensional convolutional neural network with just 3 convolutional layers and no normalization. It was lightweight and fast to train, but that also made it prone to underfitting or overfitting. We didn't get a strong generalization on the validation set. So to improve that, I redesigned the network by deepening it, adding batch normalization after each convolution, increasing the number of filters from 64 up to 256, and starting with a wider kernel. These changes aim to help the model extract richer, more stable features from the spectrograms. And it did help. We saw a small bump in validation accuracy. You can see that in the training curves that the loss is decreasing and the model is definitely learning, but despite those improvements, the overall accuracy is still low. So why is this happening? It's because one-dimensional convolutional neural networks struggle to capture both the time and frequency dimensions that are essential in spectrograms. These audio recordings are also noisy, and some classes are hard to separate. So our next step would be to try a two-dimensional convolutional neural network, which could better those model patterns, or even use pre-trained models, but we didn't have enough time. So why an MLP? I chose to build an MLP, or multi-layer perceptron, not just because it was easy, but because it's a strong baseline for model comparison. First, it's fast to train and easy to debug, which helped me iterate quickly during development. I didn't need to worry about the complexities of the convolutional filters or spatial hierarchies. Second, MLPs work well on flattened spectrograms, since they don't make any spatial assumptions. This is useful when we're unsure whether time frequency locality is preserved well in the data. So while CNNs aim to learn structure in the spectrogram, the MLP just focuses on learning the dense mappings directly from the raw features, and it turns out that was surprisingly effective. So MLP training and performance, I'd say it's decent at best. So despite being simple, the MLP performed decently well. It reached about 85% validation accuracy, and during the training was very stable. So no signs of overfitting. It actually outperformed the 1-degree convolutional neural network, which is interesting because we usually expect the convolutional neural networks to do better with time series like inputs. But that outcome likely suggests that an architecture mismatch between the convolutional neural network design and the actual structure in the data. It's not that MLPs are better in general, it just worked better in the setup. So the MLP learned useful embeddings. So to understand why the MLP works so well, I visualized its internal activations using a TSNE. On the left, you can see BirdNet's baseline embeddings. They're a bit scattered with some overlapping classes. On the right, we see the MLP hidden layer activations, and it's much cleaner. The model creates tighter class clusters, which means it's learning meaningful internal representations, even without convolutions. This tells us that the MLP isn't just memorizing, it's learning to separate species in feature space. To better understand why the MLP works so well, I visualized its internal activations using TSNE. On the left, you can see BirdNet baseline embeddings. They're a bit scattered with some overlapping classes. On the right, we see MLP hidden layer activations, and it's much cleaner. The model creates tighter class clusters, which means it's learning meaningful internal representations, even without convolutions. This tells us the MLP isn't just memorizing, it's learning to separate species in feature space. That kind of structure is really encouraging for such a simple model.